Welcome back, everyone, to Afrodo Reviews, and on this channel, I help you decide. Is that book worth reading over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? That's what we're here to decide. Today's book is Underwild, River of Spirits, which is a YA fantasy novel steeped in Greek myth and published on March 25th of 2025 by author Shana Targosz? Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't actually know how to say this, and I apologize, but anyways, this book could technically be qualified as an urban fantasy, as while the setting is largely fantastical in nature, it is set in a modern day, and a smartphone is central to the plot and characters of the story. The book is labeled as the first in a series, though the second book, Relic of Thieves, has yet to be released as of my making this video. However, all things considered, with the relatively new age of this book, I really can't offer too much else on it in terms of background. So, without further ado, and now let's move on to the cover. And the cover of this book is gorgeous. This is another book that I'll admit that I just picked up purely because I love this cover art. Walking through the store, I actually did make me stop and just go closer to examine it. It's genuinely beautiful. It features what I can only figure to be our main character, Senka, sitting on a ferry front and center, driving it through the underworld's rivers while her cloak billows around her. The amazing blends of purple, whites, and just... I want a framed picture of this cover. Just to hang on my wall, I'll be completely honest with you. I love it that much. And to give the book credit, the back of the cover isn't just blank. As if you opened it, it forms a complete picture where it shows this snow-white dragon creature following Senka underneath the waves. I even ended up grabbing one of the special edition books. So in addition to this beautiful cover art, the book also has decorated pages, which are purple and decorated with white raven feathers. The best part of all this is it's gorgeous, and it even tells you about what the book's about. It really is like a perfect cover. But what is this book about, I hear you ask? Well, the synopsis inside would have you believe. Senka lives between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead. As ward to Charon, the ferryman of the underworld, Senka assists in guiding recently departed souls across the river and into their afterlife. Although Charon has taught her the rules of fairy years, there is much he avoids telling her. Though Senka doesn't understand why some rules are important, she listens. She must heed them in order to become the official farrier. Then a living girl, Poppy, enters the underworld to plead for help in finding the ghost of her brother. But helping Poppy goes against the rules. When Poppy is yanked away by the river's currents, Senka leaps to save her, and they are swept downriver into the unmapped depths of the underworld, far from everything Senka has ever known. Lost in the Underwild, Senka and Poppy encounter spirits of lore and eccentric ghosts, and not all are willing to let souls slip through their grasps. Senka knows the living can't stay in the realm of the dead for long, and if Poppy isn't returned to her home soon, she'll become lost to the underworld forever. But as Senka travels deeper into the Underwild, she discovers Charon may hold the answer to the mystery surrounding her own existence. As Poppy and Senka dodge angry demigods, hungry race, and a terrifying dragon chimera, Senka starts to unravel the truth of her own past. Soon Senka won't just need to save Poppy's life. She'll also need to save her own. All things considered, it's not a bad synopsis. I do think there are a couple things here and there that feel like it was just added to make you think of other series and make you think, oh, maybe it's just like that. And, you know, as my title of this video would tell you, that it wasn't completely unsuccessful in that regard. For example, the part about the angry demigods, I really don't know any demigods that exist within this book. I really just kind of feel like it's there to make you think of the Percy Jackson series, which the book really didn't need to do. But for the most part, I think this synopsis goes pretty well on what you need to know to get excited for this book and build a good foundation of what to expect without spoiling anything in the process. Then becomes the question, what did I think of this book? Well, you might all know by now that I often comment on something that when I read newer books especially, is that the more gorgeous and fitting the cover art tends to be, the less I tend to like the book. This can probably be chalked up to the fact that the cover art being so beautiful gives me too high of expectations for it. But it is a trend nonetheless. Well, I can't officially say that this book bucks that trend. I love this book. No, this really isn't even me exaggerating. I genuinely love this book. Reading this book took me back to the days when I was reading Percy Jackson and the Olympians for the first time. That title down there, the video, yeah, that's not me just exaggerating. That's not just because the synopsis lied to me about there being demigods in here. That's not just because this book features Greek mythology with modern day settings. The book genuinely does feel like a modern day version of the Percy Jackson stories for me. I can see this fitting right alongside the world, becoming part of the Riordanverse if it wasn't for the fact that their interpretations of Greek myth are inherently contradictory. The characters are pretty interesting, the mystery is pretty good, and the set pieces are fantastical in just the right way. I can genuinely believe that Poppy and Senka become friends throughout the book, and there's a pathway if the author wants to keep the relationship platonic or turn it romantic in future works. Because, I'm going to say right off the bat, the book definitely did feel like it was. It didn't quite commit to it, so I don't know if this is what the author intends, or this was just a happy accident. Well, I guess that's kind of both the same thing. But, definitely a little bit of a ship tease between Senka and Poppy. It does move a little bit fast in my opinion, but that's a critique I'll get into a bit later. I liked how Charon was characterized throughout the book, along with the other mythical characters such as M and Mortimer. The book is told through a first-person point of view. The character's voice is very strong and filled with personality that it really does work. The way the author plays with Greek myth is pretty good, offering her own unique interpretations of it that are pretty interesting. The idea that Tartarus is not some dark, dank prison, but rather a sort of twisted amusement park where the prisoners of Tartarus are the attractions. It invokes that idea of like, maybe Hades is like P.T. Barnum of a sort. The author provides just enough knowledge to show she is clearly familiar with Greek mythology, so that when she does play with how things work, it doesn't feel like the lack of understanding of myth in general, but just as a way of doing something more interesting, a twist on the formula, if you would. The way the Underworld works is that it's like its own unique realm. People don't really get judged by the three judges of the Underworld to decide if they really deserve Elysium, which is heaven, Tartarus, which is hell, or the fields of Asphodel, which is much more like a purgatory. People just go to their own personalized heavens. I'll be honest, it did sort of give off vibes of the Shadowfell from D&D as opposed to the Underworld of Greek mythology. That's a tiny complaint in comparison, though. Another interesting thing that the author does is that she does use a lot of lesser-known Greek deities. With Senka being the assistant of the farrier Charon, you obviously see quite a bit of him, and you see deities that are relatively lesser known. To say more would probably end up with me spoiling, so to move on. Now, I can't be too positive about this book, or I might ruin my street cred. So one of the problems I did have with the book is the story does feel a little rushed. Now that's strange to say considering the book is about 432 pages, which is at least 50 pages bigger on average compared to the normal read. But it felt like there was just so much crammed into each little set piece that it got a little dizzying at times, and there was never really a point where the characters felt like they just sat back and ruminated on what was happening. There's no real point where they just kind of sit back and we get to see them as characters to a degree. I think the story definitely might have benefited from taking a moment to just breathe and let them bounce off each other for a bit without some kind of threat hanging over their head. In addition, it is still a YA book, well, closer to a middle school level read. So there are obviously things that just don't quite work the older you are as a reader. I don't offer these as complaints necessarily speaking, just acknowledgements for my older base that if you do want to pick this up, just remember this is for kids. The things like the story being written with a lot of parenthetical asides. Though, unlike Mark, they're used mostly correctly. They can either be charming or annoying depending on where you stand on their use. For me, I did sort of fall on both sides depending on the moment. For the most part, I will say that they were mostly charming and that the author didn't overdo them like it happened in Mark. Another issue is that Poppy is probably way undercharacterized for what she's meant to do. Well, I'm not saying she doesn't have any character. I am saying that when it comes down to it, Poppy feels more like a bronze statue compared to the gold and silver statues of characterization throughout the rest of the book. Most of her character revolves around how much she loves her brother, and we only get a few glimpses of who she is outside of that. Even some of the glimpses are ultimately tied to a younger brother's memories. I hope that when the sequel comes around, we'll definitely see more of Poppy and get more of her characterization, considering that for someone that's mentioned in the synopsis as the deutero protagonist, it really doesn't feel like one. She feels more like a side character. I think to talk a little bit more about the book does require me to give a bit of spoilers, as the other compliments and complaints I have require me to delve into that territory. So I'll be doing my best to mitigate this as much as possible, as I really do want people to go out and read this book and buy it, and it is an inevitable fact of this review that from this point on, you will be spoiled. So here's your 5-second warning to either skip to the conclusion or find a new video. Although I recommend just the conclusion, or, if you do find a new video, go and find one of my videos, because my videos are... Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the villain. Now, when it comes to the villain, I am sort of mixed. On one hand, I actually do kind of like them. There's the idea of using a lesser-known goddess with ties to the underworld as the main antagonist is nice. And unlike many YA books, she has an understandable motivation for doing what she does. And though the characters don't necessarily treat it as sympathetic, it is a sympathetic motivation from an outside viewpoint. You can understand why this character is doing what she does when she spells it out. The downside of that is she has to spell it out for you. One of the things that I really did get bothered with this story is how little time our villain ends up getting for the story. Melanoy was interesting, but she's only really in the final 100 pages or so at most, so we don't really get to explore her as a character. And while I think her motivations are interesting, I definitely would have preferred to learn about them more in the actions she does rather than just her going on the villain monologue. I feel like this book could have easily have been about Poppy and Senka just being lost in the Underwild, and didn't necessarily need to introduce Melanoy as the ultimate antagonist just yet. Her goal in general is interesting in that it isn't inherently evil to do. It's mostly just selfish, as she's willing to risk greater harm coming to the world in order to achieve it. But her goal isn't to cause the world harm. It isn't world domination or you kill those filthy little Mortys.
Fucking Mortys.
She just wants to rock around mortals and experience life as they do for a while. It's pretty interesting to see that her main motivation is out of jealousy of mortals' brilliant but quick lifestyles, where she sees her own as long-lasting but infinitely much more dull. To move on, I did like the ending of the book far more than I thought I would. Honestly, I admit I was a little surprised when the book commits to the idea that Poppy needs to learn to grieve her brother and let him go, rather than giving her an ending where Joey is brought back to life. It sort of reads like that one Minecraft book I reviewed this year as well, The Crash. Though that was a much more obvious where it was going, as opposed to this one, which is a bit more subtler. In that, I didn't actually know if they were going to let Joey move on, or there was going to be some sort of ancient rule that Poppy and Senka discover that allow her to reclaim his soul. It felt nice to see a young adult book not give a protagonist an easy out. Senka's reveals are a little more interesting than Poppy's. and Melanoy's. I think the story gets a little heavy-handed in its attempt to give Senka some abandonment issues, as she assumes that her parental figures keep wanting to get rid of her. But I can't blame her since she's always given just enough information to come to that conclusion. Even in the last parts of the book, the story tries to psych us out by showing us a memory where her biological father seemingly calls her his biggest regret. And then she's distracted just long enough to happen to miss his explanation as to why he wants that particular memory removed. And because, no offense, it's obviously going to turn out that her father didn't regret her in the slightest, especially from what we've seen in the story so far. And especially because it doesn't take that long before it's revealed, no, he really didn't regret her. This is just out of context. And like I said, it just gets a little cheap near the end. A part of me is a little disappointed that Senka turns out to actually be a mortal whose memories were mostly erased, and then she was later adopted by Charon into his assistant. But that's just because I like the idea of Charon having an assistant farrier, and it would have been interesting to see a story focused around like a minor godling, rather than another mortal or demigod. Actually, that being said, I even would have accepted her being a demigod of, say, Hades and some lady, or maybe Charon fell in love with a living woman and it's a demigod of him. But I can't fault the book where it went. This is just me mentioning I would have preferred this, but it's not a problem of the book. That's just my own personal opinion. So I'm not faulting the book in any way for that. But I will say that the end does give some genuinely good emotional moments during the finale. I admit, not many books get me misty-eyed, but this book somehow managed it with the end. The author really sells the grief that the characters are feeling at certain points, and it doesn't feel like we're just expected to believe these characters are feeling these things because the author is saying, hey, guess what? The character's sad. Yeah, he's really sad right now. Yeah, so sad. Just, they're very sad. I mean, yeah, sure. This is still written for a younger audience, so don't go out and expect master-level writing aimed at the most intellectual of minds. But this book, really does sell the emotions well. It's better than some adult books I've read. It's not quite Bridge to Terabithia level, but it is good enough. It's really good. I don't know why I said good enough. Good enough implies it barely reached it. It's good. Now, I know this review has come off a little rambling about how I'm doing this book, but honestly, that's just because for every complaint I have like 2 more compliments to give. This generally was one of the better books I've read this year, and because of that, I think I have to give it an 8 out of 10. Yeah, this book is pretty good. I really do recommend picking up this book. It really does feel like a modern-day Percy Jackson. Like I said, I really do think this book would fit perfectly into that Riordan verse if it wasn't for the fact that they both involve completely different interpretations of mythology. The Charon in this book would not be the Charon in Percy Jackson, is all I'm saying. I do recommend reading this. I'm definitely gonna pick up Relic of Thieves because this book I really liked a lot. And for a debut novel, this is amazing. I realize I didn't say that in the background, but yeah, this is the debut novel. So this is one of those books that I really do recommend that. This is a great book. The cover art is actually on a book that deserves it. It's amazing. I mean, honestly, seriously, I will take this cover art as a frame picture. Like, oh my god, I love this cover art so much. But anyways, I don't really have much else to say on that. This is one of those reviews that is almost entirely positive with very little negative. So I don't have much to wrap up in that regard. So with that being said, yeah, just remember, with every book comes an adventure. And every adventure is worth having. Even the bad ones. See you later, everyone.